Hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions, ready now to give you my thoughts on the tabletop game Rogue Dungeon. This is primarily a card-based dungeon crawl for 1 to 3 players that you can purchase at thegamecrafter.com print-on-demand website. Now, normally I wouldn't give much time to considering a game there. Anyone can sell any game there without any playtesting or quality assurance of any kind, but a couple video reviews convinced me I had a good chance of enjoying this game. And on that note, I want to give a shout out to the YouTube channels Geek Gamers and The Dungeon Dive for their video reviews of Rogue Dungeon, and would really recommend that you check them out as well. But right now, I'm going to give my own overview and thoughts on the game after spending about 5 to 10 hours with it. I played it exclusively in its solo mode, which seems to be its primarily intended mode of play. There are rules for adding more players and an expansion to provide more components in service to that end, although not additional rules. But the rules for using more than one player are vague and really leave a lot of questions. And you'll find that in the comments and reviews at the Game Crafter on the page for this game as well. The object of the game is to take your hero through 5 levels of a dungeon, which become progressively more challenging as you descend. If you make it to the end and defeat the boss, you win. If you die anywhere along the way, you fail and have to start all over again from scratch. There are 5 character classes available, including Sorcerer, Rogue, Crusader, Elf Ranger, and Dwarf Miner. Each character card comes double-sided with male and female sides, each of which has identical stats. Each character has a list of starting equipment and skill cards. In the case of skills, you don't have use of them all immediately, but gain access to your skill cards progressively as you gain XP and boost your stats. And so, in this way, the skill cards represent a sort of single branch skill tree that is unlocked over time. Each level of the dungeon is represented on a single playing card by a series of corridors that connect colored nodes. You use a small meeple to keep track of where your character is at, moving from node to node and drawing an appropriately colored card at each node to discover the nature of the room. Rooms may contain traps, merchants, recruitable henchmen, monsters, or other scenarios you would expect from a classic dungeon crawl. However, most non-combat situations are resolved with a simple ability check, rolling 1d10, possibly with modifiers, and hoping to get a number less than your rating in that ability. Other times you may succeed at a task in a room by using or discarding an item or spell you have acquired along the way. The colors of each node roughly indicate your chances of coming across something helpful or dangerous, so there is some strategy in determining which path you will take through each dungeon level. Gaining XP and items is essential to your success. Items make you more capable. Gaining XP allows you to increase your ability stats, which have a number of positive effects on your chances in the game. But do you move forward while you're doing well, or push your luck by going out of your way to find treasure or gain XP through defeating traps or monsters? Both monster and treasure variety were real strengths of the game for me. Each of the 14 level cards has 3 combat rooms. Levels 1 through 3 each have 8 different kinds of monsters, and levels 4 through 5 each have 9, for a total of 42 different kinds of monsters you can run into. On a single run, I think you'll likely only see between 10 to 15 of those 42 types, if you make it all the way to the end, which itself has 3 different boss monsters to defeat in order to win the game. Despite being mostly a card-based game, I really enjoy the components. The art is not the most polished on the market, but also looks professional and gives me that classic, serious D&D aesthetic that so many dungeon crawls seem afraid to repeat in their art. And the visual quality extends to the playmat and other cards, including characters and equipment. As for loot and treasure, there are 75 loot cards that are not greatly duplicated. I found the variety of loot to be very satisfying, especially when coupled with the regular rate and the method of acquisition, which almost always comes from fighting monsters. Now, combat involves rolling 1d10 and adding your associated weapon skill level, whether that's melee, ranged, or magic. And again, you can increase that with experience points. And then also you add in any modifiers that may be relevant. And then you do damage equal to the number of weapons you have of that type on you at the time if you successfully score a hit. If you roll above the monster's combat value, you hit them and do damage. You roll below it, they do damage to you. You roll their combat number exactly, and you both damage each other. So a single roll of 1 die represents an all-out combat exchange, factoring in the potentially multiple weapons at your disposal. This continues over multiple rolls until either you or the monster are dead. Other elements come into play during combat as well. You may have spells that do direct damage without requiring a roll to hit, or henchmen, spells, or armor that will take hits for you and then be destroyed in the process. But no matter the case, as with all elements of the game, things progress pretty quickly. Now, the listed playtime is 30 to 60 minutes, but in my experience, once you're familiar with the rules, 30 minutes, I think, maybe on the high side of the length, especially given the mortality rate that I've experienced so far. I've only played using the Sorcerer class, which admittedly is tied with the Rogue for the lowest health, but playing with the rules as written, I have never made it to the bottom of the dungeon and can easily end up dead in less than 15, 10, or even 5 minutes. The difficulty is likely due to the game's attempt to mimic classic computer roguelikes, which are known for their quick character advancement, progression through a randomized dungeon, and steep mortality rate. I have personally never been even remotely interested in this sort of punishing gameplay experience at the tabletop or in a video game, but I could tell even before buying the game that it could likely be modified to suit my tastes without much trouble at all. And for this reason, after 1 or 2 failed runs, I started rolling 2 dice every time and then just taking the best result from those 2. I allowed my unspent experience points and gained skill points to be retained after dying and starting over at the beginning of the dungeon again. I permitted all spent spells to be restored when camping. You have limited opportunities to camp throughout your entire crawl. I also converted unneeded health points that I earned through my camping roll to restore luck points or starting equipment items. So I definitely gave myself some crutches and some cheats and helps to get it to the place that I wanted it to be in terms of difficulty. Even with these adjustments, I still died at least twice before finally beating the game, and because, in part, because a lot of the game is very luck-oriented. But those deaths, as I was playing the game with my adjustments to it, only served as motivation rather than discouragement, because I could go back, and on the second or third attempt, I was overpowered for those early dungeon levels, and so I could rack up experience and enjoy some of the power fantasy that I play role-playing games for. Now, like any classic D&D style fantasy game, it has some elements of magic and monsters that may cause some Christians to sort of raise an eyebrow. Others may be concerned that players can take the role of characters who use sorcery or have skills like backstab. So for concerned Christians like that fall in that category, I want to recommend my video titled "Can Christians Be Evil in Games?" Where I take a deep dive into this issue. Aside from that, as far as like themes and stuff and things that might be relevant to the Christian perspective in particular, there was just 2 things that popped out at me thematically, one negative, one positive. On the negative side, there's a card called Song of Sirens that I think objectifies the female body through its depiction of nearly nude women. It was a bummer to find, since the rest of the game, including the female hero portraits, is much more conservative, and I think the idea of a seductive siren can be conveyed without going this artistic route. But it's just one card, can easily be left out of the game. On the positive side, I found it noteworthy that a crusader seems to come from a monotheistic background instead of the typical polytheism of these kinds of fantasy settings. I inferred this from their ability Hand of God, which could have easily been named Hand of the Gods, or something more vaguely good or vaguely light-oriented. The Crusader also has an emblem which looks very much like a stylized cross, so if you want to play as a uniquely powered servant of God in this game, it doesn't require much headcanon to do that. Now, as a print-on-demand game, the price is naturally more than you would pay for a mass-produced retail game with the same components. It has a price tag of $48.99, and with shipping, I paid just under $61 total. There's probably no way of dodging that price, since the game is print-on-demand and used copies are going to be pretty rare. For me personally, $61 stings a bit for what you get here compared to many other tabletop dungeon crawls. For example, Amazon Prime offers the core set of Pathfinder the Adventure card game for a little over $50 with free shipping if you have Amazon Prime. However, that game is a bit incomplete and sort of assumes you will continue buying expansions for it. It also takes considerably more time to play. And other tabletop dungeon crawls will be well over $60 because of their inclusion of miniatures or other cost-increasing components. Dungeon crawl games are easily my favorite genre of tabletop gaming. And while Rogue Dungeon doesn't ultimately provide some of the more in-depth campaign experiences that I can find in other games, it really is exactly what I have been looking for recently. It's a dungeon crawl that can give me a thematically rich yet fast-moving and condensed experience in 30 to 45 minutes or less. And as an added bonus, it's very compact, and so it will now actually replace One Deck Dungeon as my vacation tabletop dungeon crawl game. I would say if you're looking in particular for a streamlined, short dungeon crawl that can have a campaign element if you want, and if a variety of good artwork on cards is just as valuable to you as other more expensive types of components, Rogue Dungeon is worth looking into some more. I've got content coming up in about a month that will give you a better look at how the game is played, as I plan to play it during my solo Tabletop Dungeon Fest livestream event. That's going to be the last week of September. You can see the notes below the video version of this review for the dates for that event. I hope you will come and check it out. But those are all of my thoughts for now. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. I have updated my playlist to help you find what you're looking for, anything from controversial topics that are relevant to Christian geeks, interviews with creators like author Brent Weeks and The Chosen's Dallas Jenkins, growing in faith as a geek, tabletop gaming, comic books, video games, movies, and TV shows, or you can just get to know me a little bit better. There is a playlist for you with more content being added to them all the time, so I hope you'll take a look and enjoy what you find. Thanks.